Coming up in this video, I'll show you how to create the ultimate boot disk, the last boot disk you'll probably ever need. I'll be using an amazing free and open source utility called Ventoy, which lets you take a single USB flash drive and load it up with all your favourite boot disks. Normally you'd have a boot disk that does one specific thing, like boot into a recovery tool or launch a partition manager, or even install a complete operating system like Windows 11. But every time you need a new boot disk, you'd need to reformat the USB disk and create new bootable media, or you'd need to keep a stash of multiple boot disks. With Ventoy, Ventoy is the boot disk. You add all your favourite boot disks by simply copying the ISO file for each one onto the Ventoy disk. You can then boot from the Ventoy disk and select whichever ISO file you want to boot into. I'll show you how to create a Ventoy boot disk and add your own ISO files. We'll also take a look at customizing Ventoy by changing the appearance of the boot menu. And if you stick around to the end of the video, I'll show you how you can also install Ventoy to a fixed hard disk instead of a USB disk. Before all that, I want to say thanks to FlexiSpot for sponsoring this video. FlexiSpot specialise in ergonomic home and office furniture solutions. In particular, they've got a great range of premium standing desks. And when FlexiSpot reached out and invited me to take a look at one of their standing desks, it was perfect timing. I went for an E7 premium desk where you can choose between a black, grey or white frame and then pick a desktop size and finish. I chose a white frame and the 72" by 30" maple chipboard desktop, but there's quite a few different desktop options and sizes to choose from. The frame looks and feels premium with a high quality finish. The motors are hidden in each leg and the power pack and cables are hidden inside the cable tray to allow for a clean and tidy look. Anytime you feel like you need a change of position, you can simply tap on one of the presets and go from sitting to standing within a few seconds. By the way, this desk supports a weight capacity of 355 pounds. That's like the equivalent of 2 adults, so you can pretty much put anything you like on this desk. There's a handy controller attached to the edge of the desk which has a manual up and down option, or you can have up to 4 presets. Conveniently, the controller also has a full-size USB charging port on the side, which is super useful for charging your cell phone while keeping it close to your workspace. If you're in the market for a standing desk, having used this one for the last few weeks, I can highly recommend FlexiSpot. Check out the link in the description below and take advantage of this coupon code at checkout for a $30 discount. Thanks again to FlexiSpot for sponsoring this video. Okay, let's get started by heading over to ventoy.net. Click on Downloads and there are 3 options to choose from. There's a version for Windows, a version for Linux, and there's also an option for a live CD, which I'll come back to a little later in the video. I'll choose the Windows version. That takes us to another download page. I'll click on the Windows version again to download the app to my Downloads folder. It downloads as a zip file, so I'll right click on the file and choose Extract All. Then Extract. Once extracted, go inside the Ventoy folder and double click on Ventoy to Disk. You can say yes if you get a user account control warning. You don't need to install Ventoy, it's like a portable app, it just runs when you click on it. You'll need to insert a USB flash drive. And by the way, when you create a Ventoy boot disk, it completely wipes any existing files on that USB drive, so ensure you don't have any data on there that you want to keep. I'll insert my USB disk and then click on the refresh button. We can now see my USB disk has appeared in the list of devices. Before you click on install, there's a couple of decisions you need to make which will determine how the boot disk will be created. Click on the option menu item and then go down to partition style. You need to specify whether you want the USB disk to be created with an MBR or GPT partition style. MBR is an older legacy partition style and GPT is the newer modern way to format disks. But which one you choose will depend on what computers you'll be using the boot disk on. If you'll be using a combination of older and modern computers, then you might want to select MBR to maximise compatibility with older systems. Choosing MBR means you'll be able to boot the disk on systems that use both the legacy BIOS and the more modern UEFI BIOS. But Ventoy won't boot if Secure Boot is enabled. You would need to temporarily disable Secure Boot when booting to Ventoy. On the other hand, if you'll be using the boot disk mostly on modern computers where some of them may have Secure Boot enabled, or you want to use a USB disk that is larger than 2 TB, then you'll want to choose GPT. The second decision you need to make is what file system do you want to format the main partition with where your ISO files and other data will be stored. Go into partition configuration and then you have the option of formatting the partition with exFAT, NTFS, FAT32 or UDF. I'll leave mine on exFAT. While you're here, you also have the option of preserving some space at the end of the disk. This option will create an extra partition on the USB drive. This is a separate partition that isn't used by Ventoy at all, but you could use it for storing other files that you want to keep separate from the main Ventoy partition. This is a good time to mention that you can also use the main Ventoy partition for storing any type of file. It's not just for ISO files. You can mix and match ISO files with any other type of data. You could store some boot disk, for example, but you could also store some other files like device drivers or installer files for software applications. Creating a separate partition is just a way of keeping files separated from each other. I want to make the whole disk available as one big partition, so I'll leave this option blank. And finally, before we click on install, if you choose a GPT partition style, you'll want to make sure there's a tick on Secure Boot Support. Enabling Secure Boot Support means that you can boot on machines that have Secure Boot enabled. If you don't have this ticked, you'd need to temporarily disable Secure Boot in order to boot Ventoy on that computer. Once you've selected your options, go ahead and click on Install. If you have any existing files on the USB disk, you'll be prompted to type yes in the box to confirm that you understand that all existing data will be lost. So I'll go ahead and type in yes. It warns us that the drive will be formatted and any existing data will be lost. Go ahead and click on yes to continue. It then double checks that you really want to continue to format the disk. I'll say yes, and the app will then create the boot disk. A few seconds later, you should see a confirmation message to say Ventoy has successfully been installed to this device. I'll click OK to finish. You'll also notice there's an update button. This is for when a new version of Ventoy is released. Instead of rebuilding your boot disk from scratch and copying all of your ISO files over again, you can simply download the latest version of Ventoy and choose Update instead of Install. This updates only the boot partition with the new Ventoy version, while keeping all your existing data and ISO files on the main partition intact, saving you the time and hassle of copying your ISO files over again. Okay, we can close the Ventoy app and go back into File Explorer. Here I can see my new Ventoy disk. If we click on the disk, it actually looks like it's blank. When Ventoy creates your USB disk, it creates a small partition at the end of the disk. This partition contains the Ventoy software. You won't see the contents of this partition and you'll never need to interact with it. If we go back to File Explorer and look at the main partition which is labelled Ventoy, this is where you save your ISO files and any other files you want to save on that disk. You can simply save them anywhere on the USB disk, even in different folders, and when Ventoy boots, it will search all folders and will show all available ISO files on the boot menu. I normally create a folder called ISO and copy my ISO files in there just to keep them in one place and keep things neat and tidy. But you could go one step further and create subfolders. For example, you could have a folder called Windows and have different versions of Windows installers in there, and the same for Linux. Create a folder called Linux and store all your favourite Linux distros in there. It's just a way to keep your ISO files organised. I'll copy some ISO files onto the USB disk, then restart the PC and boot into Ventoy to show you what it looks like. You normally need to press a certain key combination to get into the boot options on your PC. I'm on a Dell computer and need to press F12 to get to the one-time boot settings. Now I'm at the boot selection screen, I'll go ahead and choose my Samsung flash drive. And here we are at the boot menu. You'll see a list of all your ISO files and you'll notice it displays each one using the file name of the ISO file. You could rename your ISO files to give them friendlier names and make the boot menu look a little bit nicer if you wanted, but I'll show you another method for making the menu look nicer when we look at customizing Ventoy shortly. To choose an ISO file to boot from, simply use the arrow keys to move up and down the list and then press enter to boot from the ISO file of your choice. I'll choose a Windows 11 install ISO. By default, you'll get a second boot menu. This is there to maximize compatibility with some ISO files. But once you know all your ISO files boot OK, you can disable this second boot menu so your ISO files will boot as soon as you select them. And once you're at the second boot menu, go ahead and click on boot in normal mode. That ISO file should then boot. But if it doesn't load for any reason, you can try another method on the second boot menu. For Windows boot disk, you can choose WinBoot, or for Linux disk, you can try Grub2 mode. If you boot Ventoy on a computer that has Secure Boot enabled, the first time you try you will get this blue screen saying security violation. We need to enroll the key or the hash one time per machine. Press on OK, then press any key to perform MOK management. At the next prompt, select Enroll key from disk. Then select Ventoy EFI at the next screen and select Enroll this key in MOK Manager. Then click on Continue and Reboot. Ventoy should then boot successfully. You only need to do this once per machine, but you will need to do it the first time you boot on a computer that has Secure Boot enabled. Okay, now let's take a look at how to customize Ventoy. When Ventoy first came out, to make any customizations or changes to the boot menu, you had to manually edit a JSON file, which is basically a fancy text file. It's difficult to edit and it's easy to make a mistake, and any changes made might not work. Thankfully, the guys at Ventoy have provided an easy-to-use graphical interface which will update the JSON file for you. Go back into your Ventoy folder that you downloaded earlier and double-click on Ventoy Plugin. Ventoy Plugin is the graphical utility that will update the JSON file for you. You'll see a drop-down box listing any USB disks that are connected. Make sure your Ventoy USB disk is plugged in and highlighted, then click on Start. The configuration page will then open up in a web page. There's too many options to talk about all of them, but I'll pick out a few that I think are worth mentioning. The first thing we'll look at is customizing the boot menu theme. I'm sure you'll agree that the default theme is not that easy on the eyes. First, we need to download a new theme by browsing to gnomelook.org. Scroll down and click on Grub Themes and you'll see pages and pages of themes available to download. I'll go ahead and download a theme. The theme downloads as a zip file, so I'll extract the contents. I'll copy the entire folder and paste that onto my Ventoy partition. I'll create a themes folder and paste it inside there. Right-click on theme.txt and choose Copy as Path. Now go back to the config page and under the File section, click on Add. Paste the file path and be sure to delete the quotation marks from the path and then click OK. We can now close the config page and go back to the Ventoy plugin utility and click on Stop. Now if you reboot and boot from your Ventoy USB, you should see the new menu theme. You can add multiple themes and change between them anytime by pressing F5 on the boot menu and choosing Theme Select. Okay, let's go back to the config page and check out some other customizations. I'll go into the Global Control plugin options. By default, Ventoy will search the entire USB disk partition for ISO files and will display them on the boot menu. If you have a lot of ISO files, the boot up process could be slow or the menu could get too big. You may not want every ISO file to always show on the boot menu. In those cases, you can tell Ventoy to only search in a specific folder for ISO files. That way you could save ISO files outside of that folder and they won't show on the boot menu. If you later decide you want to include one, you can simply move the ISO file into the specified ISO folder and it will then be available on the boot menu. Next up is a Windows 11 hardware check. You may or may not know that Microsoft place quite strict hardware requirements for installing Windows 11, which means a lot of computers that are capable of running Windows 10 fall below the requirements and are not able to install Windows 11. By default, when booting to a Windows 11 installer ISO, Ventoy will skip the hardware check and enable you to install Windows 11 on computers that would normally fail the minimum hardware check. Additionally, the next option allows you to do a clean install of Windows 11 and bypass the requirements for an online Microsoft account. Next up is the menu mode. By default, the boot menu will show in list view mode. You can change the default so it displays the boot menu in tree mode, which shows a directory structure as opposed to a flat list. You can also toggle this view on the boot menu by pressing F3. The next option is the menu timeout, which by default is set to 0 seconds, which means the menu will not time out if no ISO file is selected. Changing this setting to a number greater than 0 means a default ISO file will boot after the timeout has passed if no manual selection is made. And conveniently, the next option allows you to specify the default ISO file to boot if no selection is made and the timeout has been set. There's a lot more options to explore, but I want to finish off by showing you how to install Ventoy to a fixed hard disk instead of a USB disk. You may be thinking, why would someone want to install Ventoy to a fixed hard disk? And that's a good question. And if you need to ask it, you probably don't need that feature. But I have seen this question asked before, so I wanted to include it here. If we go back to the Ventoy to disk utility, initially Ventoy doesn't show fixed disks. That's by design, as they don't want users to accidentally overwrite their hard disk containing their OS installation and data. There's two ways to install Ventoy to a fixed disk. The first one is to install the desired disk as a secondary disk to your OS disk. If you try to install Ventoy to the only fixed disk in the system, it would fail, as the utility first wipes the disk before it installs the Ventoy software. But it works fine when the target disk is not the disk containing the OS. If you don't have a secondary disk to use, there's another method that you can use. If we go back to the Ventoy download page, I mentioned earlier that there's an option for downloading a live CD version. If we download that and add it to a regular USB version of Ventoy, you can then boot into the live CD, and the Ventoy app will then allow you to install Ventoy to the only fixed disk in the system. Whichever method you choose, once you're in the Ventoy to disk utility, click on the options menu and then tick Show All Devices. You will then be able to select a fixed disk to install Ventoy. Okay, that just about wraps up this introduction to the brilliant Ventoy utility. Let me know in the comments if you already use Ventoy and what you use it for, or if you're new to Ventoy and have a question, leave it down below and I'll try and answer it for you. Thanks again to FlexiSpot for sponsoring this video. If you're looking to buy an awesome standing desk, then check out the links in the description below. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.